The highway stretched endlessly under the night sky, black as ink and silent except for the hiss of rain. Ethan Parker had been driving for 6 straight hours, the hum of his tired engine keeping him company as mile after mile of Texas road disappeared beneath his headlights. He wasn't running late, just running. From the argument that morning, from the wedding plans he no longer felt sure about, from a life that suddenly felt heavier than it should. Then, as if the world had been listening, his car sputtered. The dashboard lights flickered once, twice, and the engine coughed itself into silence. Ethan coasted onto the shoulder, heart sinking as the car rolled to a stop beside an empty field. The rain picked up, tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. The battery light glowed weakly. He cursed under his breath, resting his forehead on the steering wheel. Out here, between small towns, there were no streetlights, no passing cars, no hint of civilization, just the sound of the storm and the hum of crickets beyond the glass. His phone screen showed one blinking bar of service. The call to roadside assistance failed twice. Sophie's name sat near the top of his contacts list. Her smiling photo, a reminder of how much he didn't want to hear her say, "I told you so." He stepped out into the rain, the cold soaking through his jacket almost instantly. The smell of wet asphalt hit him, sharp and real. Headlights flashed in the distance, and Ethan's heart jumped. He raised an arm, waving desperately. The lights slowed. A deep engine rumble filled the night air. A massive semi pulled onto the shoulder behind him, air brakes hissing like a sigh. The driver's door opened with a metallic creak, and a figure climbed down, a man in a reflective vest and a baseball cap pulled low. His flashlight beam cut through the rain until it landed on Ethan's face. "You all right, man?" The voice was deep, steady, and carried that Oklahoma drawl that made everything sound easy. Ethan nodded, half embarrassed, half relieved. "Car died. Won't start." The man knelt to check under the hood, his flashlight sweeping across the wet engine. "Battery's toast, maybe alternator. You're not going anywhere tonight." He stood, wiping rain from his beard. "Nearest town's 20 miles. I can give you a ride to the next truck stop if you want. Better than freezing out here." Ethan hesitated, looking from the dark road to the man, but there was something honest in the stranger's tone, something steady. "Thanks," he said finally. "I'd appreciate that." The truck's cab was warm and smelled faintly of coffee, leather, and diesel. A country station murmured quietly through the speakers. The man introduced himself as Jack Monroe, hauling freight to Oklahoma City. He handed Ethan a thermos, coffee. "It's not great, but it's hot." Ethan took a sip and smiled faintly. "It's good. Better than gas station stuff." Jack grinned, eyes on the road. "That's not saying much." They drove in silence for a while, the windshield wipers marking time. Outside, rain streaked the glass, blurring the world into silver and gray. Ethan found himself talking, without meaning to, about his job in Austin, about the engagement that felt like walking uphill, about how he wasn't sure when life had become something to endure instead of something to enjoy. Jack didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding occasionally, that easy calm never leaving his face. After a long pause, Jack said quietly, "You sound like a guy who's been carrying too much for too long." Ethan let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting years to escape. "Yeah, guess so." They pulled into a diner parking lot, one of those roadside places that stayed open all night, the sign flickering with half-dead neon. Inside, the air was thick with coffee and bacon grease. The waitress barely looked up as they sat at the counter. Jack ordered black coffee and pie. Ethan followed suit, grateful for warmth and noise. They talked about little things, weather, music, bad coffee, long drives. Ethan found himself laughing once, surprised at the sound. Jack looked at him with that small, quiet smile again. "There it is," he said. Knew there had to be a real one in there somewhere. Ethan shook his head, chuckling. "Haven't had much to laugh about lately." "Then you're overdue," Jack replied. When they walked back to the truck, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Jack unlocked the cab, then hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "You can ride with me to Denton in the morning. There's a decent mechanic there. Safer than waiting on this highway overnight." Ethan hesitated again, but nodded. "Yeah, thanks, Jack, I appreciate it." Inside the truck, the heater hummed softly. Ethan looked out the window, the darkness stretching forever. He felt tired, but oddly lighter, the kind of exhaustion that came after letting your guard down. Somewhere between the silence and the sound of the rain, he realized he wasn't thinking about Sophie or the argument or the wedding. He was thinking about the stranger beside him, a man who had stopped when no one else did, and how, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. The rain softened to a mist sometime after midnight. The hum of the truck engine was low and steady, almost comforting. Jack kept his eyes on the road while Ethan leaned against the window, watching the reflection of highway lights ripple across the glass. The miles rolled by in quiet rhythm, two strangers sharing a kind of peace that didn't need words. When they reached the truck stop outside Denton, the lot was nearly empty. Just the glow of fluorescent lights, the faint buzz of vending machines, and the sound of tires on wet pavement. Jack parked near the back, shutting off the engine. "You can grab a shower and something warm inside," he said, pulling on his jacket. "I'm gonna fuel up." Ethan nodded, stepping into the cold air. The place smelled of rain and diesel. Inside, he found himself staring at the rows of truckers sitting alone at tables, coffee mugs, tired eyes, and lives spent on the road. It felt oddly safe. He bought 2 sandwiches, a couple of coffees, and brought them back to the truck. When Jack returned, his cap was damp and his jacket darkened with rain. "You didn't have to get that," he said, surprised. Ethan smiled a little. "Least I can do. You saved me tonight," they ate quietly. Outside, fog drifted through the lot, wrapping the trucks in a soft gray haze. Jack leaned back in his seat, glancing over. "So you really from Austin?" "Yeah," Ethan said. "Born and raised. Work keeps me busy. It's good money, but it's not what I pictured my life looking like." Jack chuckled. "You're still young. You can change it." "Maybe. Sometimes it feels like I've already made too many promises." There was a pause. Jack's voice softened. "You talking about her?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Sophie. We've been together since college. She's great, really. Just lately I don't know who I am when I'm with her." Jack looked at him, eyes steady but kind. "Maybe you're just tired of pretending everything's fine." Ethan stared out the windshield, the truth sitting heavy in his chest. "Yeah," he whispered. "Maybe that's it." For a while they just sat there, the truck cab warm and quiet. Country radio hummed low through static. Jack poured the last of the coffee into Ethan's cup, their fingers brushing for just a second. Neither said a word, but both noticed it. Ethan looked down, trying to focus on the cup, but his pulse betrayed him. Something about that brief touch, the calm in Jack's presence, felt too real. It wasn't attraction exactly, not at first. It was something deeper, the feeling of being seen when you didn't even know you wanted to be. Jack broke the silence. "You can crash in the sleeper if you want." "I'll take the front seat." Ethan shook his head. "You've been driving all day." "I'll take the front," Jack smiled faintly. "Suit yourself." He slid into the bunk, boots off, settling under a blanket. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, watching the rain bead down the window again. The glow from the dashboard painted the inside of the cab in soft orange light. After a few minutes, Jack's voice came from the darkness behind him. "You ever think maybe we meet people for a reason? Even the ones we're not supposed to?" Ethan turned slightly. "You mean like fate?" Jack laughed quietly. "Maybe not that fancy. Just timing, maybe. Like the world puts someone in your path right when you need a reminder you're still human." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. His chest felt tight with something unspoken, something he didn't want to name. The sound of the rain deepened. Ethan closed his eyes, leaning his head back. He could hear Jack breathing evenly behind him, slow and steady, the kind of rhythm that made the world feel safe for a moment. He didn't realize how long he sat there awake, listening to that sound. His thoughts tangled between guilt and gratitude, confusion and calm. Every once in a while he'd glance back, just to see if Jack was asleep. He wasn't. Their eyes met once in the dark, only for a second. But that second said more than words could. When dawn finally crept through the fog, the air inside the truck was still. Jack stirred, rubbing his face before reaching for the small coffee pot behind the seats. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough from sleep. Ethan nodded, trying to smile. "Morning." Jack handed him a cup, their fingers brushing again. Light, but deliberate this time. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Neither man spoke for a while. The silence wasn't awkward, it was loaded. A quiet understanding had formed overnight. Something had shifted between them, though neither would name it. Jack glanced out the window. "We'll head out soon. I'll get you to your car. Should be towed in Denton by now." Ethan nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Thanks, Jack, for everything." Jack looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the road. "Ain't nothing, man. Just glad I came by when I did." As the truck rolled back onto the highway, Ethan looked at the passing clouds. He didn't know what last night meant. He just knew that somewhere in the quiet, something in him had come undone, something that couldn't be reversed. The sky was a dull gray when they got back on the highway. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a thin fog that drifted low across the fields. Ethan sat in silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on the endless stretch of road ahead. The world looked the same, but something inside him felt permanently altered, like a note that had gone slightly out of tune and could never sound quite right again. Jack drove with quiet focus, his hands steady on the wheel, his gaze fixed forward. Every so often he'd glance over at Ethan, like he wanted to say something but chose not to. The hum of the engine filled the silence, steady and comforting, but underneath it hung a tension neither man knew how to name. After an hour, Jack finally spoke. "You sleep okay?" Ethan managed a small nod. "Yeah, thanks for letting me stay." Jack gave a faint smile. "You were safer there than out in the cold." "I wasn't gonna just leave you." Ethan studied the lines in Jack's face, the quiet strength, the weariness that seemed familiar. It wasn't just that Jack had helped him, it was that he had seen him when nobody else seemed to notice. That simple kindness had hit deeper than it should have. They stopped at a gas station on the outskirts of Denton. The tow truck driver was already waiting beside Ethan's car, engine idling. The moment felt strangely final, like the end of a movie you weren't ready to finish. Jack killed the engine and sat back. "Guess this is it," he said softly. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, at his broken car, then back at Jack. "Yeah, I guess so." Jack reached for his thermos, took a sip, then glanced sideways. "You'll get it fixed. Get back to your life. Everything will go back to normal." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe that's the problem." Jack's eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't press. Instead, he leaned forward, elbows resting on the steering wheel. "You know, sometimes people show up in your life when you need to see something about yourself. Don't always mean it's supposed to last. Doesn't make it meaningless, though." Ethan looked down at his hands, his throat tight. "What if what you see isn't what you wanted to find?" Jack smiled sadly. "Then maybe it's what you needed to find." The silence between them deepened. Ethan wanted to say something, to thank him, to explain, to apologize for feelings that had no name. But every word that came to mind felt wrong. So instead, he just reached for the door handle. Jack spoke again, voice softer this time. "Take care of her, or if you can't, at least be honest about why." Ethan froze for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I will." When he stepped out of the truck, the air felt colder than before. He stood there, watching as Jack started the engine again. The truck rumbled to life, headlights slicing through the fog. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the window. Two men who had shared something neither would ever say out loud. Then Jack pulled away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance until there was nothing left but silence. Ethan watched until the taillights disappeared completely. Only then did he realize how empty the highway felt without that truck's hum beside him. He drove home later that afternoon, his car fixed, but his thoughts spinning. Sophie called when he was halfway back to Austin, her voice bright but distant. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just tired." She talked about dinner plans, about wedding details he barely heard. He murmured agreement, eyes fixed on the horizon. Each word she said felt like it was meant for someone else. The version of him she thought still existed. That night, lying beside her, Ethan couldn't sleep. The ceiling above him felt too white, too silent. Sophie turned in her sleep and rested a hand on his chest, and he tried to relax under the weight of her touch. But his mind was somewhere else, back on that highway, in the cab of that truck, in the quiet glow of dashboard light, where a stranger had listened like nobody ever had. He hadn't done anything wrong. Not really, but he knew something inside him had crossed a line anyway, a line that didn't need to be physical to matter. In the following days, he went through the motions: work, calls, plans. But sometimes when traffic slowed or rain started falling, he'd catch himself looking at the highway shoulders, wondering if he'd ever see that truck again. He never did. But in some quiet part of him, Jack's voice lingered, that calm, steady warmth reminding him of the truth he'd learned that night. Sometimes, the most dangerous kind of infidelity isn't about bodies. It's about finding in someone else what you've been missing in yourself. Ethan never told anyone about that night. He didn't have to. The memory stayed with him, not as guilt, but as a quiet ache. A reminder that one rainy night on a Texas highway, a stranger had stopped not just to help him, but to show him a part of himself he could never quite forget.